The October wind cut through Martha Sullivan's threadbare shawl like a knife through butter, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. She pulled her two children closer, their small bodies the only warmth she'd known in the 3 days since they'd left the last town. Little Emma, barely 6, clung to her mother's skirt with one hand while clutching a rag doll with the other. Thomas, all of 8 years old but trying so hard to be the man of their small family, walked with his thin shoulders squared against the cold. The town of Willow Creek, Wyoming territory, sprawled before them like a collection of weathered wooden blocks tossed carelessly onto the prairie. Martha counted the buildings as they approached: a general store, a saloon with piano music spilling onto the dusty street, a boarding house with peeling paint, and a small church with a crooked steeple. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the smell of bread from the bakery made her stomach clench painfully.
"Mama, I'm hungry,"
Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind.
"I know, sweetheart.
Mama's going to find us something to eat real soon." Martha forced a smile she didn't feel, tasting the lie bitter on her tongue. The last of their food, a heel of stale bread, had been divided between the children yesterday morning. The first stop was the boarding house. Mrs. Elmira Hutchins, a woman whose face looked carved from the same weathered wood as her establishment, barely cracked the door open. Her eyes swept over Martha's travel-stained dress, the children's dirty faces, and the absence of any man or luggage. "We don't take in strays," she said, already closing the door. "Try the church. Please, ma'am, I can work. I can clean, cook, do laundry." The door slammed shut. At the general store, Mr. Josiah Pike was more polite but no less firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan. Martha Sullivan. Mrs. Sullivan. I've got my wife and daughters to help in the store. Times are hard enough without taking on more mouths to feed." His eyes softened slightly as they fell on the children. "The church might—" "Thank you." Martha cut him off, not wanting to hear another person tell her to try the church. She'd learned that churches in frontier towns had little charity for women who arrived alone with children and no wedding ring to prove their respectability. Her ring, the last thing of value she'd owned, had been sold 2 towns back for food. The saloon was out of the question. She wouldn't expose her children to that, no matter how desperate she was. But as they passed, a woman in a low-cut red dress stood in the doorway. Their eyes met, and Martha saw a flash of understanding and pity before she hurried the children along. The bakery's warmth drew them like moths to flame. Martha stood outside for a moment, letting the children press their noses against the window, watching the baker pull fresh loaves from the oven. When she finally worked up the courage to enter, the bell above the door seemed to announce their desperation to everyone inside. "Mr. Holbrook?" she addressed the flour-dusted man behind the counter. "I'm looking for work. I'm a fair hand at baking, and I can't help you." He interrupted, not unkindly. "My nephew just came out from Ohio to help with the business. Try the restaurant down the street." The restaurant owner, a pinched-faced woman named Mrs. Calder, looked at Martha as if she were something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. "A woman traveling alone with children? I run a respectable establishment. We don't need your kind bringing trouble." "My kind?" Martha's voice shook with exhaustion and growing anger. "I'm a widow, ma'am, trying to feed my children." "That's what they all say. Move along before I call the sheriff." By the time they reached the church at the end of Main Street, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. Reverend Matthias Thornby was a thin man with a thin smile and thin charity. He listened to Martha's plea with his hands clasped and his eyes focused somewhere over her shoulder. "The church helps those who help themselves. Mrs. Sullivan, a woman in your situation, might find it difficult to maintain the moral standards our congregation expects. Perhaps if you had family somewhere, or a male relative who could vouch for your character." "I have no one," Martha said quietly. "Just my children." "Then I shall pray for you," he said, already turning away. "God provides for the sparrows, after all." But God, Martha thought bitterly as they left the church. seemed to have forgotten about her particular sparrows. The sun was now an orange disk balanced on the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold that would have been beautiful if Martha had any capacity left to appreciate beauty. They'd made a full circuit of the town's businesses. Even the laundry, run by a Chinese family who spoke little English, had shaken their heads apologetically. Thomas tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, what are we going to do?" Before she could answer, before she could admit that she had no answer, a group of men spilled out of the saloon. They were cowboys by the look of them, spurs jangling, hats pushed back, faces flushed with whiskey and the bravado it brought. Well, one of them drawled, a man with a scraggly beard and mean eyes. "What have we here, a little lost dove and her chicks?" Martha instinctively pulled the children behind her. "Please, we don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" Another man laughed, circling them like a wolf. "Who said anything about trouble? Just being friendly to a newcomer. You looking for work, sweetheart? I bet Ruby at the saloon could find something for a pretty thing like you." "Leave us be," Martha said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Now that ain't very friendly," the bearded man said, stepping closer. The smell of whiskey and tobacco rolled off him in waves. "Here we are, trying to help, and you're being downright unfriendly." Emma began to cry, burying her face in Martha's skirt. Thomas, brave little Thomas, stepped forward with his small fists clenched. "You leave my mama alone." The men laughed, and one reached out to ruffle Thomas's hair. "Tough little rooster, ain't he?" Martha slapped the hand away. "Don't touch my son." The laughter died. The bearded man's eyes narrowed. "You need to learn some manners. Woman, this ain't no place for high and mighty attitudes, especially when you're begging for scraps." The circle of men tightened. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. The street, which had seemed busy moments before, was suddenly empty. Even the piano in the saloon had gone quiet. In the growing twilight, shadows stretched long and dark, and Martha realized with crystal clarity that she had no one to help them, nowhere to run. She held her children tighter, feeling Emma's tears soak through her dress, feeling Thomas tremble despite his brave stance. 3 days of walking, 3 days of hunger, 3 days of doors closing in their faces, all to end here, in the dust of another uncaring town. The bearded man reached for her again, and Martha closed her eyes, praying to a God who seemed to have abandoned them as surely as everyone else had. In the distance, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, slow and steady, but she didn't dare hope it meant anything. Hope, she had learned, was a luxury she could no longer afford. The hoofbeats stopped. Martha opened her eyes to see a lone rider dismounting from a dust-covered bay horse. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd faced down trouble before and expected to face it again. In the dying light, she could make out broad shoulders, worn leather chaps, and a face weathered by sun and wind beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Evening, boys," the newcomer said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of mountain streams over rock. "Seems like you fellows have had enough fun for one day." The bearded man turned, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "This ain't your business, stranger. Move along." "Well now," the cowboy said, stepping into the circle of men with the same easy grace he'd shown dismounting. "That's where you're wrong. Bartlett, everything that happens in this town is my business when it involves folks who can't defend themselves." Martha noticed how several of the men shifted uneasily at the mention of Bartlett's name, as if the cowboy knowing it changed things. She also noticed the way his hand rested casual-like near his own gun, the leather holster worn smooth from use. "Jake McCready." Bartlett spat the name like a curse. "Should have known you'd stick your nose where it don't belong. These folks are just passing through. No concern of yours." Jake McCready. Martha filed the name away, though she didn't know if he was savior or simply another kind of trouble. He stood between them and Bartlett now, and she could see the rigid line of his back, the controlled tension of a man ready for violence but not eager for it. "See, that's where we disagree," Jake said conversationally. "The lady and her young ones look tired and hungry. That makes it my concern. Now, you boys can head back to the saloon and sleep it off, or we can discuss this further. Your choice." One of the younger cowboys tugged at Bartlett's sleeve. "Come on, Bart. It ain't worth it. Not with McCready." For a long moment, the street held its breath. Martha pulled her children closer, feeling Thomas's small body coiled tight with fear and fury. Emma's quiet sobs muffled against her skirt. The twilight deepened, and somewhere a dog barked, the sound sharp in the silence. Finally, Bartlett stepped back, his lips curled in an ugly smile. "This ain't over, McCready. You can't protect every stray that wanders into town." "Maybe not," Jake agreed mildly. "But I can protect this one." The men dispersed, grumbling and casting dark looks over their shoulders. Bartlett was the last to go, pausing at the saloon door to spit in the dust before disappearing inside. Only when the bat-wing door stopped swinging did Jake turn to face Martha and her children. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35, with sun lines around green eyes and a day's worth of stubble on a strong jaw. There was a sadness in those eyes, she thought, something that spoke of losses endured and loneliness embraced. "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat. "Jake McCready. You folks all right?" "Yes, thank you." Martha's voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Thank you, Mr. McCready. We're fine." His eyes took in their travel-worn clothes, the hunger pinching the children's faces, the exhaustion she knew must show in every line of her body. "No offense, ma'am, but you don't look fine. When's the last time these young ones ate?" Thomas stepped forward, his small chest puffed out. "We don't need charity. Mister, Mama's gonna find work, and then we'll eat just fine." Jake studied the boy with something like approval. "I admire your pride. Son, what's your name?" "Thomas Sullivan. This is my sister Emma, and my mama." "Pleased to meet you, Thomas." Jake squatted down to the boy's level. "Man to man. Pride's a good thing, but it don't fill empty bellies. Your mama been looking for work long?" "All day," Emma piped up, forgetting her tears. "But nobody wants us." "Emma." Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I apologize, Mr. McCready. We don't mean to burden you with our troubles." Jake stood slowly, his expression thoughtful. "No burden, ma'am. Mind if I ask what kind of work you're looking for?" "Anything," Martha said, too tired to maintain pretense. "I can cook, clean, sew, tend animals. I'm not afraid of hard work. I believe that." He was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Happens I could use some help out at my place. My ranch hand quit last month, and I've been making do. But with winter coming..." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I got a ranch about 5 miles north. Nothing fancy, but there's a cabin, good water, plenty of work. I could use someone to keep house, cook meals, help with the basic chores." Martha's heart leaped, then just as quickly sank. A single man, a isolated ranch. She knew how this story could end. "Mr. McCready, I appreciate the offer, but before you say no," he interrupted gently, "let me be clear. I'm offering honest work for honest pay. The cabin's yours. I bunk in the barn most nights anyway. I'll pay fair wages plus board. You'll have your privacy and my word as a gentleman that you'll be treated with respect." "Why?" The word slipped out before Martha could stop it. "Why would you help us? You don't know us." Jake was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "Lost my wife and daughter to fever 3 winters back. Amelia would have been about your Emma's age now." He cleared his throat. "Clara, my wife. She never could turn away folks in need. Guess some of her rubbed off on me." Martha studied his face, searching for deception, for hidden motives, for any sign that this was too good to be true. All she saw was a sadness that matched her own, and a straightforward honesty that seemed increasingly rare in this hard land. "Mama," Thomas tugged at her sleeve. "Emma's awful cold." That decided her. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with winter coming and her children depending on her. We accept your offer, Mr. McCready, and we're grateful. Just Jake, he said. And no need for gratitude. Like I said, you'll earn your keep. He looked at the darkening sky. We should head out. Gets cold quick once the sun sets. He led them to a wagon parked outside the general store, helped Martha and the children climb aboard, then tied his horse to the back. As he took the reins, Martha noticed the way several townspeople watched from windows and doorways. Some looked curious, others disapproving. She wondered what stories would be told tomorrow about the widow who left town with Jake McCready. Don't mind them, Jake said, noticing her attention. Folks here are quick to judge and slow to help. Always been that way. As they rolled out of town, Emma curled up against Martha's side and fell asleep almost instantly. Thomas fought to keep his eyes open, still trying to be the protector. The stars began to emerge, brilliant in the clear mountain air, and Martha allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. "Jake," she said quietly, "what should I know about Bartlett? Will he be trouble?" Jake's hands tightened on the reins. "Sam Bartlett's a bully and a coward, but he's got friends. He won't come to the ranch. He knows better, but watch yourself if you come to town alone." "I can take care of myself." "I don't doubt it. Ma'am, woman traveling alone with 2 children has to be tougher than rawhide. Just saying you won't have to. Long as you're working for me, you're under my protection." They rode in comfortable silence after that, the wagon wheels creaking a rhythm that soon had Thomas sleeping too. Martha held her children close and watched the landscape roll by, sagebrush and grassland giving way to low hills dotted with pine. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and its pack answered, their calls echoing off the mountains. "Almost there," Jake said as they crested a rise. In the valley below, Martha could make out the dark shapes of buildings, a cabin, a barn, what looked like a corral. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, and lamplight glowed warm in one window. It wasn't much, perhaps, but after 3 days of closed doors and cold nights, it looked like heaven. "You left a lamp burning," she observed. "Always do," Jake said simply. "Never know when I might be bringing someone home who needs to see a light waiting." Martha blinked back sudden tears. After so much hardness, such simple kindness threatened to undo her. She felt Thomas stir against her shoulder, heard Emma's peaceful breathing, and made a silent promise. Whatever Jake McCready's reasons for helping them, whatever work waited in that lamplit cabin, she would prove worthy of this chance. She had to. Her children deserved a home, and if she had to work her fingers to the bone to give them one, so be it. In the distance, the lamp continued to burn, a small defiance against the vast darkness of the prairie night. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the cabin, and Martha's first impression was of sturdy loneliness. Built from pine logs chinked with mud and moss, the structure stood solid against the mountain wind, but there was something forlorn about it, like a man who'd forgotten how to smile. A thin layer of dust on the porch rails, weeds growing tall against the steps, empty flower boxes beneath windows that hadn't seen curtains in years. Jake lifted the sleeping children from the wagon with surprising gentleness, carrying Emma while Martha roused Thomas enough to walk. Inside, the lamp they'd seen from the ridge cast pools of yellow light that only emphasized the shadows. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 3 chairs, one notably smaller than the others, and shelves that held a sparse collection of dishes and supplies. "Bedrooms through there." Jake nodded toward a door. "Should be clean enough. I aired it out last week." Martha peeked inside to find a simple rope bed with a corn husk mattress, a washstand, and a trunk. Everything was clean but austere, bearing the unmistakable mark of a house kept by someone who maintained it out of duty rather than love. "This will do fine," she said, meaning it. After sleeping in barns and under wagons, a real bed seemed luxurious. Jake had already started a fire in the fireplace, the wood crackling and sending blessed warmth into the chilly room. "There's salt pork in the larder, some potatoes in the root cellar, flour and such in those tins. Coffee, too, if you're inclined." Martha's stomach clenched at the mention of food, but she forced herself to focus. Where will you? Barnes got a good loft. Been sleeping there most nights anyway. He shifted uncomfortably. Truth is, I haven't spent much time in the house since. He trailed off. But Martha understood. Some ghosts were too heavy to share a roof with, while Jake tended to the horses. Martha set about making the place habitable. First things first, food for the children. She found the supplies he'd mentioned and soon had salt pork sizzling in a cast-iron skillet. The potatoes were sprouting eyes, but still good enough. She mixed up a batch of biscuits, her hands remembering the familiar rhythm even as exhaustion pulled at her bones. Mama, it smells like heaven, Thomas said, sitting at the table with Emma, both children watching her work with rapturous attention. When Jake returned, stamping dust from his boots at the door, he stopped short. The aroma of cooking food, the sight of children at his table. Martha moving about his kitchen with practiced efficiency for a moment. His carefully composed expression cracked, revealing a grief so raw it took Martha's breath away. Supper's almost ready, she said gently, pretending not to notice. Children, help set the table. They ate in relative silence, broken only by the children's appreciation of the simple meal. Martha noticed Jake ate mechanically, his eyes often drifting to the small chair, to the shelf where a child's carved wooden horse sat gathering dust. After supper, while Martha washed dishes, Jake showed Thomas how to bank the fire for the night. Emma, fed and warm for the first time in days, had curled up in the large chair by the fireplace, her rag doll clutched tight. Your daughter, Martha said quietly, hands deep in soapy water. What was her name? Amelia. Amy. We called her. His voice was rough. She loved to help her mama with the dishes. Had to stand on a box to reach the wash basin. Martha said nothing, just continued washing, letting the silence invite whatever he wanted to share. Fever took them both. Winter of '82, Doc said there was nothing could be done. Clara went first. Amy 2 days later, buried them up on the hill under the big pine. He cleared his throat. Haven't had much use for the house since then. I'm sorry, Martha said, knowing how inadequate the words were. Long time ago now. Jake stood abruptly. I'll leave you folks to settle in. Breakfast is usually at dawn, but take your time tomorrow. Rest up. He paused at the door. There's a rifle above the mantel. It's loaded. You know how to use one? My husband taught me. Good. I don't expect trouble, but it's best to be prepared. He touched his hat brim. Good night, Mrs. Sullivan. After he left, Martha tucked the children into the big bed, their small bodies barely taking up half the space. They fell asleep instantly, exhaustion finally claiming its due. She sat by their side for a while, stroking Emma's hair, watching Thomas's face relax in sleep. Later, she explored the cabin more thoroughly. In the kitchen cupboards, she found good dishes pushed to the back, gathering dust. A woman's apron hung on a peg by the door, faded from blue to gray. Small touches everywhere spoke of the family that had been. A sampler on the wall with careful cross-stitch reading, God bless our home. A rocking chair worn smooth in just the right places. That carved horse on the shelf. Martha touched none of it. Respectful of grief she understood too well. Her own losses seemed fresh again in this house full of ghosts. Samuel, her husband, taken by a mine collapse. The baby she'd lost the winter after. The farm sold to pay debts. The long journey west in search of family that turned out to have moved on. The gradual descent from respectable widow to desperate wanderer. She shook off the memories and set to work. By lamplight, she swept the floors, wiped down surfaces, made mental notes of what needed doing. The house had good bones, as her mother would have said. It just needed life breathed back into it. From the bedroom came the sound of Emma whimpering in her sleep, bad dreams again. Martha hurried to comfort her, smoothing the child's hair until she settled. Through the window, she could see light in the barn loft. Jake McCready, sleeping in a barn to give them his house. What kind of man did that? Morning came too soon, announced by a rooster Martha hadn't noticed the night before. She rose quietly, leaving the children to sleep, and started breakfast. Real coffee, what luxury. She found eggs in the hen house, strips of bacon in the smokehouse, and made flapjacks that would stick to the ribs. Jake appeared just as she was setting the table, looking surprised. "You didn't have to." "I did," Martha interrupted. "You hired me to cook and keep house. I intend to earn my wages." He sat down awkwardly, as if he'd forgotten how to be a guest at his own table. When the children emerged, tousle-haired and shy in the morning light, he greeted them gravely, man to man with Thomas, gentle with Emma. After breakfast, Jake showed them around the property. The ranch wasn't large, maybe 160 acres, but it was well situated with good water and grass. A small herd of cattle grazed in the lower pasture, and there were 24 horses in the corral. "It's not much," Jake said, almost apologetically, "but it's honest work." Martha looked at the mountains rising behind the property, the creek singing over rocks, the sturdy barn and outbuildings. After weeks of uncertainty, it looked like paradise. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. Thomas had already discovered the barn cats, while Emma picked late wildflowers with a solemn concentration. For the first time in months, Martha felt something unknot in her chest. Not hope exactly. She'd learned not to trust that, but something like the possibility of hope. Jake watched the children play, that lost look creeping back into his eyes. "They're good kids," he said. "You've done well by them." "They're all I have," Martha said simply. "I understand that." He turned to her, his expression serious. "Mrs. Sullivan, I want to be clear about something. This arrangement, it's as much for me as for you. This place has been dying slowly for 3 years. Maybe having folks here again will—" He paused, searching for words. "Maybe it'll help me remember why I'm keeping it going." Martha met his gaze steadily. "We all have our ghosts, Mr. McCready. Maybe working together, we can keep them quiet." He nodded, something passing between them, an understanding born of shared loss and the determination to keep moving despite it. Then he clapped his hands, breaking the moment. "Right then, let me show you what needs doing." They spent the morning going over the routine feeding chickens, gathering eggs, milking the cow, tending the vegetable garden that had gone mostly to seed. Martha's hands, soft from weeks of travel, would soon be work roughened again, but she welcomed it. Honest work for honest pay. He'd said, after so many closed doors, it felt like salvation. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment. Martha threw herself into the work with fierce determination, rising before dawn to start breakfast, spending her days in a whirlwind of cooking, cleaning, mending, and tending. The house began to lose its abandoned air. Windows sparkled, floors gleamed, and the smell of fresh bread replaced the mustiness of disuse. But when evening came and Jake retreated to the barn, an uncomfortable tension would settle over the ranch. Martha would put the children to bed and then sit by the fire, darning socks or working on a shirt she'd found half-finished in Clara's sewing basket. The empty chair across from her seemed to mock the peculiar loneliness of their arrangement. 2 broken families occupying the same space, but never quite becoming whole. It was the 7th night when she finally addressed it, after tucking the children in. Instead of settling by the fire, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and walked to the barn. She found Jake in the loft, sitting on a makeshift bed of hay and blankets, mending a bridle by lantern light. "Mrs. Sullivan?" He looked up, surprised. "Is something wrong?" "This is wrong," she said, gesturing at his sleeping arrangements. "It's your house. You shouldn't be sleeping in a barn." "We've been through this. No, you've decided and I've accepted because I had no choice. But it's been a week now, and I need to say this." She took a breath. "I'm grateful for what you've done for us, more grateful than you know. But I can't bear the thought that we've driven you from your own home." Jake set down the bridle, his face unreadable in the lantern light. "You haven't driven me anywhere. I told you. I was sleeping out here most nights anyway, because the house holds too many memories. I understand that, but hiding from those memories won't make them go away. She pulled her shawl tighter. The children think you don't like them. Thomas asked me yesterday why Mr. Jake won't eat supper with us anymore. That hit home. She saw him flinch. Since that first night, he'd taken to eating quickly and leaving, or taking his plate outside. I don't mean to hurt them, he said quietly. I know, but you are. Martha moved closer, her voice gentler. Jake, we're not trying to replace your family. We couldn't even if we wanted to, but we're here and we're alive, and we need more than just a roof and wages. The children need to feel wanted, not just tolerated. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was rough. It's harder than I thought it would be. Seeing children at that table again, hearing laughter in the house. Sometimes Emma tilts her head just like Amy used to, and it's like a knife in my gut. I can't imagine how painful that must be, Martha said. But Jake, you hired us. You brought us here. Some part of you must have wanted life back in that house. Maybe I did. Maybe I'm a fool. Or maybe you're a good man trying to find his way back from grief. She turned to go, then paused. Tomorrow's Sunday. I'm making pot roast. The children would be pleased if you join us properly. Think about it. She left him there, making her way back across the dark yard by starlight. Behind her, the barn was silent, but she'd said what needed saying. Sunday dawned crisp and clear. Martha rose early, determined to make a meal worth sitting down to. She set the roast to slow cook with carrots and potatoes, made fresh bread, and even attempted a dried apple pie with the stores she'd found in the cellar. The children, sensing something special, put on their cleanest clothes without being asked. Thomas slicked his hair down with water, and Emma wore the ribbon Martha had found in her sewing basket, faded blue, but still pretty. Is Mr. Jake coming to eat with us? Emma asked, setting the table with exaggerated care. I don't know. Sweetheart, we'll set a place for him and hope. As the sun reached its zenith and the kitchen filled with the aroma of Sunday dinner, Martha began to lose hope. But just as she was taking the roast from the oven, she heard boots on the porch. Jake appeared in the doorway, clean-shaven, wearing what was obviously his best shirt. Smells good in here, he said awkwardly. Emma beamed. Mr. Jake, Mama made pot roast and pie and everything. So I see. He ruffled her hair gently, then caught himself, hand freezing mid-gesture. But Emma just giggled and pulled him toward the table. You sit here, she directed, pointing to what had clearly been his usual seat. And Thomas sits there, and Mama there, and I sit in the special chair. Martha saw Jake's face go still. Emma had claimed the small chair, the one built for a child, the one that had sat empty for 3 years. Martha started to intervene, but Jake shook his head slightly. That's a good chair for a little girl. He managed. The meal began awkwardly. Conversation stilted and careful, but gradually, the children's natural chatter filled the gaps. Thomas peppered Jake with questions about the horses, while Emma solemnly informed him about the barn cat who'd had kittens. 6 of them, she said, holding up fingers. All different colors. Thomas says we can't keep them all, but I think we should. 6 cats might be a few too many, Jake said, his mouth quirking in what was almost a smile. But maybe we could keep 1 or 2, if your mama agrees. Martha watched the ice slowly thaw. Jake began to relax, actually tasting his food instead of just consuming it. When Thomas knocked over his water glass in his enthusiasm about something, Jake merely helped clean it up, waving away the boy's apologies. Accidents happen, he said. Why, one time, Amy... He stopped abruptly, the name hanging in the air like smoke. The table went quiet. Martha held her breath, watching Jake's face cycle through pain, surprise, and something that might have been relief. Amy was my daughter, he said finally, looking at Thomas and Emma. She was about your age, Emma, and she was forever knocking things over because she talked with her hands, just like you do. Emma's eyes went wide. What happened to her? Emma, Martha started to scold, but Jake held up a hand. It's all right, She got sick. Her and her mama both. They died. He said it simply, the way you'd explain any fact of frontier life to children who'd already seen their share of hardship. That's why I've been sleeping in the barn. This was their house, too, and sometimes it hurts to remember. I'm sorry your little girl died, Emma said solemnly. Our papa died, too, in a mine. I'm sorry about your papa. Mama cried for a long time. Emma continued with the devastating honesty of children. But she doesn't cry so much anymore. She says we have to keep living. Jake looked at Martha across the table, something shifting in his expression. Your mama's a wise woman. After dinner, the children insisted on showing Jake their treasures. Emma's rag doll, carefully mended by Martha, Thomas's collection of interesting rocks, the pictures they'd drawn with charcoal on precious scraps of paper. Jake admired each one gravely, and Martha saw his shoulders slowly unknot. When evening came, Jake stood to leave as usual, but hesitated at the door. That was nice, thank you. You're welcome any time, Martha said carefully. It's your house, after all. He nodded, started to go, then turned back. The barn's actually not bad, good hay, warm enough, but maybe I could take breakfast in the house. If that suits you. That would suit us fine, Martha said, fighting to keep the relief from her voice. Over the following days, Jake began spending more time in the house. He'd appear for breakfast, sometimes linger over coffee. In the evenings, he might sit on the porch whittling while the children played nearby. He was still careful, still guarded, but the sharp edge of his grief seemed to be softening. One evening, as Martha worked on mending by lamplight, Jake surprised her by taking the opposite chair. They sat in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds, the pop of the fire and the whisper of thread through fabric. I've been thinking, Jake said eventually. Winter's coming on fast. That barn loft gets mighty cold. Maybe I should move back to the house. He paused, not looking at her. I could sleep in the lean-to off the kitchen. It's got its own door, plenty private. Martha kept her eyes on her sewing to hide her smile. That sounds sensible. The children would like having you closer, I think. Just for the winter, he clarified quickly. Of course. But they both knew it was more than that. The house was coming alive again, and Jake was slowly, carefully, allowing himself to be part of that resurrection. It wasn't about forgetting Clara and Amy. Their presence was woven into every board and beam. It was about learning to live with ghosts instead of for them. That night, after Jake had helped carry his few belongings to the lean-to room, Martha stood in the kitchen listening to the new sounds of the house, Jake's boots being pulled off, the creak of his cot, his low voice responding to Thomas's question through the wall. Not a family, perhaps, not yet, but something, a beginning. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, when Jake was out checking the fence lines and Martha was elbow-deep in bread dough. Thomas saw him first through the window, a lone rider approaching slow and steady, like trouble taking its time. Mama, Thomas said, his voice tight. Someone's coming. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. The man was well dressed for these parts. Black coat, string tie, boots that shone even through the trail dust. But it was his face that made her blood run cold. She'd seen that face in her nightmares for months. Angular, cold-eyed, with a mouth that never quite smiled even when it curved upward. Children, she said, keeping her voice calm. Go to the bedroom, now. But Mama, now. Thomas, take your sister. The knock, when it came, was polite. 3 measured raps, like a man who knew time was on his side. Martha checked that the rifle was within reach above the mantel, then opened the door. Hello, Martha, Hiram Thorne said, touching the brim of his hat. You're looking well. Widowhood seems to agree with you. What do you want, Hiram? Now, is that any way to greet your late husband's brother? He made to step inside, but Martha blocked the doorway. His eyes hardened. We have business to discuss. We have no business. I told you in Kansas City. You told me nothing. You ran, in the middle of the night, like a thief. with property that rightfully belongs to me. My children are not property. No, but the debt their father owed is real enough. $3,000. Martha, did Samuel ever tell you about that? About how I staked him for that mine? About the papers he signed? Martha's hands clenched in her apron. That supposed debt died with Samuel. Oh, I think not. Hiram produced a folded document from his coat. See, it says right here, the debt passes to his heirs, and since those little ones are too young to work it off themselves, well, his smile was all teeth. There are establishments in San Francisco that pay good money for young ones, especially pretty little girls like Emma. Martha's hand moved toward the rifle, but Hiram caught her wrist, his grip punishing. Careful now. Wouldn't want the children to see their mama do something foolish. Let go of me. I've spent 6 months tracking you, Martha. 6 months in considerable expense. You're going to repay that debt, one way or another. The sound of hoofbeats made them both turn. Jake was riding in fast, and Martha saw his hand drop to his gun the moment he spotted Hiram. Morning, Jake said pleasantly, but his eyes were ice. Don't believe we've met. Jake McCready. Hiram released Martha's wrist, stepping back with calculated casualness. Hiram Thorne. I'm Mrs. Sullivan's brother-in-law. Just stopped by for a family visit. That's so. Jake dismounted, moving with the same easy grace he'd shown with Bartlett's gang. Funny thing about family visits, they usually don't leave bruises. Martha rubbed her wrist, and Jake's eyes tracked the movement. Something dangerous shifted in his expression. This is a private matter, Hiram said. Between family. Well now, that's where you're wrong. Jake positioned himself between Hiram and Martha. Mrs. Sullivan works for me. That makes her welfare my business. And I'm particular about folks who threaten people under my protection. Hiram studied Jake, taking in the worn gun belt, the calloused hands, the quiet readiness. You don't know what you're interfering with, Cowboy. This woman owes me $3,000. That's so. You got proof? Hiram produced the paper again. Jake took it, read it slowly, then handed it back. Interesting document. Course, it's signed by Samuel Sullivan, man I never met, but I understand he's been dead near 2 years. The debt passes. To his estate, sure. You file that with a court. Get a judge to review it? Funny thing about debts, they need to be properly documented and legally transferred. This paper. Jake held it up to the light, examining it critically. This looks like something written up recent. Ink's still dark. Paper's too clean for something supposedly signed years ago. Hiram's face flushed. Are you calling me a liar? Just observing. See, I've dealt with enough cattle contracts to know old paper from new, but maybe I'm wrong. Tell you what, Judge Carlton holds court in Laramie. We could ride over, have him take a look. Course, he's particular about forged documents. Tends to take a dim view of them. The two men stared at each other, the air crackling with tension. Martha held her breath, acutely aware of the children probably listening from behind the bedroom door.
Finally,
Hiram stepped back.
this isn't over. That debt is real, whether you believe it or not, and I'll collect what's owed me.
You're welcome to try, Jake said mildly. But you'll do it legal, through proper channels, and you'll stay off my land while you're doing it. Your land. Hiram's laugh was ugly. Playing house with another man's wife. How noble. Jake's hand twitched toward his gun, but Martha touched his arm. He's not worth it, she said quietly. Hiram mounted his horse, but paused before riding off. You can't protect her forever, McCready, and you. He looked at Martha. You know what I'm capable of. Think about your children. After he was gone, Martha's knees buckled. Jake caught her, guiding her to the porch steps. Easy now, he's gone. He'll be back, Martha said, her voice shaking.
He always comes back. Oh God, I should have told you. I should have warned you what you were taking on.
Hey. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. Look at me. Whatever this is, we'll handle it. But I need to know the truth. All of it. Martha looked toward the house, where two small faces peered anxiously from the window. She waved them back, then took a shuddering breath. Samuel did borrow money from Hiram, but not $3,000, maybe $300. Hiram's always been wrong, even before Samuel died. He'd look at the children in ways that made my skin crawl. After the funeral, he said the children could work off the debt, Emma in his household, Thomas in his factories. I knew what that meant. Jake's jaw tightened. So you ran. I sold everything, paid what debts I could, and ran. I thought we'd gone far enough. I thought he'd give up. She laughed bitterly. Stupid. Hiram never gives up when he thinks something belongs to him. Nothing belongs to him, not you, not the children, nothing. That paper is a forgery, like I said. Oh, he might have had some agreement with your husband, but I'd bet my ranch it didn't say what that document says now. Jake was quiet for a moment. How far you think he'll push this? All the way. Martha met his eyes. I'm sorry. We've brought danger to your door. We'll leave. The hell you will. The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. Sorry, but you're not running anymore. That's what he expects, what he counts on. You've got a job here, a home. The children are safe and happy. I won't let him take that. You don't understand. Hiram has money, connections. He owns judges back in Kansas. This isn't Kansas. This is Wyoming territory, and we do things different here. Jake stood, helping her up. First thing tomorrow, we're going to town. You're going to tell Sheriff Watson everything. Get it on record. Then we're going to wire the authorities in Kansas City. Check if there's any official record of this debt. And if there is, then we'll pay it. $300 is manageable. $3,000, he shrugged. We'll prove it's forged. Martha felt tears threaten. Why are you doing this? We're nothing to you. That's not true. Jake's voice was rough. You've brought something back to this place. The children, he struggled for words. When I see Thomas trying so hard to be strong, Emma laughing at the kittens, it reminds me why I kept this ranch going. You're not nothing. He stopped, color rising in his weathered cheeks. Martha found herself holding her breath, waiting, but he just cleared his throat and stepped back. You're under my protection, he finished. That means something out here. That night, after a subdued supper where even Emma was quiet, Jake didn't retreat to his lean-to room. Instead, he sat cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table, a clear message to anyone who might be watching. Martha put the children to bed, then returned to find him still there. You should sleep, she said. Not tired. You. She shook her head, sitting across from him. They sat in silence, the lamp burning between them, while outside the Wyoming wind howled its lonesome song. Finally, Martha spoke. He'll try to take them while you're gone, when I'm alone. You won't be alone. I'll hire some hands, men I trust, and you know how to use that rifle. I won't let him take them. Her voice was fierce. I'll die first. Nobody's dying. Jake looked up from his gun. We're going to handle this legal and proper, but Martha, his eyes were serious. If Thorne tries anything, if he so much as sets foot on this property again, I want you to know. I'll protect you and those children with everything I've got. That's a promise. Martha nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. In 6 months of running, no one had offered to stand with her. Now this man, still grieving his own losses, was ready to face down her demons. Outside, a coyote howled, and the wind rattled the windows. But inside, in the circle of lamplight, Martha felt something she hadn't felt since Samuel died. Not safe. She was too smart to feel safe with Hiram Thorne in the territory. But not alone. For now. That was enough. The storm rolled in from the mountains 3 days after Hiram's visit, turning the sky the color of old pewter. Jake had hired 2 hands, the Hartley brothers. Good men he'd known since they were boys, to keep watch while he was out working the range, but even their presence couldn't ease the tension that had settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. Martha went about her daily chores with one eye always on the windows, starting at every unexpected sound. The children felt it too. Thomas had taken to wearing his father's old knife on his belt, though it was near as big as his forearm. Emma stayed close to the house, abandoning her usual explorations. The storm broke just after supper, rain lashing the windows with sudden fury. Jake had been out checking the cattle in the north pasture, and Martha found herself watching the door, waiting for his return. When he finally appeared, soaked through and muddy, she felt a relief that surprised her with its intensity. "Bad one coming," he said, shaking water from his hat. Temperatures dropping fast, could see snow before morning. As if to emphasize his words, thunder crashed overhead, making Emma squeak and burrow into Martha's side. The wind picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin like a living thing. "The Hartley boys made it back to town?" Martha asked. Jake nodded. "Sent them home before it got too bad. They'll be back tomorrow if the roads are passable." Which meant tonight they were alone. Martha tried not to think about how vulnerable they were, isolated here with the storm cutting them off from help. But Jake must have read her thoughts. "Nobody's traveling in this weather," he said quietly. "Not even Hiram Thorne." They settled the children by the fire, Jake telling stories about cattle drives while the storm raged outside. But even his calm presence couldn't completely distract from the violence of the weather. The wind grew stronger, rattling the windows in their frames. Then came a tremendous crack from outside, followed by a crash that shook the house. "Tree down," Jake said, grabbing his coat. "Probably the old cottonwood. I need to check it didn't damage anything. In this storm, can't have it blocking the barn door come morning." He squeezed her shoulder briefly. "Bar the door behind me." He disappeared into the tempest, and Martha did as he said, her hands shaking slightly. The children pressed close, Emma whimpering with each thunder crash. "It's just a storm," Thomas said, trying to sound brave. "We've seen worse." But they hadn't, not really. This storm felt different, charged with more than natural electricity. Martha tried to keep her voice steady as she continued Jake's story, but her ears strained for any sound beyond the wind and rain. Jake had been gone too long. She was just about to bundle the children up and go looking when the door burst open, bringing with it a gust of wind and rain, and Jake, supporting a stumbling figure, found him collapsed by the barn. Jake gasped, helping the man to a chair by the fire. Half frozen already. Martha's first instinct was suspicion. Was this some trick of Hiram's? But as the lamplight fell on the stranger's face, she saw he was young, maybe 17, with the gangly look of a boy not yet grown into his frame. His lips were blue with cold, his clothes soaked through. "Emma, fetch blankets," Martha ordered, her nurse's training taking over. "Thomas, help Jake get those wet clothes off him. We need to warm him up fast." They worked quickly, stripping the boy down to his undergarments and wrapping him in warm blankets. Martha made hot coffee laced with a little whiskey from Jake's medicinal supply, holding it to the boy's lips until he could manage the cup himself. "Thank you," the boy stammered through chattering teeth. "Thought I was done for." "What's your name, son?" Jake asked. "What were you doing out in this storm?" David Hendricks. I was looking for the Sullivan place. Got turned around in the storm." Martha and Jake exchanged glances. "Why were you looking for us?" Martha asked carefully. The boy's eyes darted between them, young face full of misery. "Mr. Thorne sent me. Said I was to watch the place. Report back on. He trailed off, shivering violently. "Easy," Jake said. But his voice had gone hard. "You work for Thorne?" "Not by choice." David burst out. "He owns the store where my PA shops on credit. Said he'd call in the whole debt if I didn't help him. We'd lose everything. My ma's sick. My little sister's." Tears leaked from his eyes. "I didn't want to spy on anybody, but he said he just wanted to know about the woman and her kids, make sure they were still here." Martha felt sick, even in this weather. Hiram was tightening his net, but looking at this miserable boy, barely older than Thomas would be in a few years, she couldn't find it in her to be angry. "How long have you been watching?" Jake asked. Since yesterday. Been sleeping in that old line shack to the south, but when the storm hit, I tried to make it to town and got lost. David looked up at them pleadingly. I'm sorry, I know it was wrong, but I didn't know what else to do. Thunder crashed again, and the boy flinched. Despite everything, Martha's heart went out to him. Another soul caught in Hiram's web. What were you supposed to report? Jake pressed. Just if she was here, if she seemed to be staying, if she was ever alone. David's voice dropped. He said once the storm passed, he'd be coming with papers from a judge. Said it was all legal. What judge? Judge Brewster, over in Garrett County. Mr. Thorne was real friendly with him at dinner the other night. Jake cursed under his breath. Garrett County was 2 days' ride, too far for them to intervene. If Hiram had gotten to Brewster, he could have any kind of papers drawn up. Another tremendous gust of wind shook the house, and suddenly the windows on the west side blew inward with a crash. Rain and wind poured in, setting everything into chaos. The fire guttered. Emma screamed, and Martha rushed to pull the children away from the flying glass. Get them to the bedroom, Jake shouted over the storm, already moving to block the windows with the table. Martha herded the children and David into the bedroom, returning to help Jake. Together they wrestled furniture against the broken windows, using blankets and boards to block the gaps. By the time they finished, both were soaked and exhausted. The main room was a disaster, water everywhere, broken glass, the wind still finding ways to whistle through their makeshift barriers. The fire had survived but burned low and fitful. We'll have to wait it out in the bedroom, Jake decided. All of us. It's the most sheltered room. They moved everyone into the small space, Jake dragging in chairs and rebuilding the fire in the bedroom's small hearth. It was cramped with 5 people, but warmer, and the solid walls muffled the storm's fury somewhat. Martha settled the children on the bed. David huddled in a chair wrapped in blankets. While she and Jake took the floor near the fire, the proximity should have been awkward, but survival took precedence over propriety. Mama, Emma whispered. Are we safe? Martha glanced at Jake, who gave a small nod. Yes, sweetheart. The storm will pass. What about the bad man? David said he's coming. Trust Emma to have heard everything despite the chaos. Martha felt Jake shift beside her. Nobody's going anywhere in this weather, he said firmly. And when they do, we'll be ready. As the night wore on, the storm's fury seemed to intensify rather than abate. The little bedroom became a haven, the 5 of them drawn together by shared danger. David dozed fitfully, muttering apologies in his sleep. The children eventually succumbed to exhaustion. Curled together like puppies, Martha found herself sitting shoulder to shoulder with Jake, neither of them able to sleep. The firelight painted shadows on the walls, and the storm's howling seemed almost like voices. You could have turned the boy away, she said quietly. Most would have. He's just a kid caught in a bad situation, like another kid I know. He glanced at Thomas. Besides, now we know Thorne's plan. Legal papers. A bought judge. Martha's voice was bitter. Same as Kansas City. This isn't Kansas City, Jake reminded her. And now we have a witness to Thorne's methods. That boy's testimony could be valuable. Martha looked at David, seeing her own children in his young, troubled face. Hiram will destroy his family if he talks. Maybe, or maybe we find another way. Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, so soft she almost missed it. I'll sleep in the barn. Martha turned to look at him, confused by the apparent non sequitur. His face was serious in the firelight, eyes fixed on the flames. That's what you said, that first night. He continued. You offered to sleep in the barn. You were so tired you could barely stand. Your children were hungry and scared, and you were still trying not to be a burden. I didn't want to presume. I know. He turned to meet her eyes. You were protecting yourself and them the only way you knew how. Just like now. But Martha... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. You don't have to do this alone anymore,
You keep apologizing for bringing trouble, keep offering to leave. But that's not what I want. The wind howled. The fire crackled. And Martha's heart beat so loud she was sure he must hear it. What do you want? He looked away, then back, something determined in his expression. I want you to stop offering to sleep in the barn. I want you to stop apologizing for needing help. He reached out, covering her hand with his. I want you to know that you'll sleep safe. Here, with me, watching over you. Martha felt tears sting her eyes. She turned her hand under his, letting their fingers intertwine. Jake, you'll sleep on me, he said quietly, echoing words not yet spoken but somehow already there between them. That's what I should have said that first night. Not the barn, not the cold. You and the children, you'll sleep safe because I'll make sure of it. The storm chose that moment to finally begin to ease. The wind's howl diminishing to a moan, the rain slowing from deluge to patter. But in the little bedroom, in the circle of firelight, something had shifted as surely as the weather. Martha squeezed Jake's hand, feeling the calluses and strength there, the promise of protection freely given. Outside, the storm was passing, but tomorrow would bring Hiram Thorne with his false papers and bought judge. Tomorrow would bring another fight for her children's freedom. Tonight, though, she sat beside a good man who'd taken them in when the world turned its back, who faced down their demons as if they were his own. Tonight, her children slept safe and warm. Tonight, she wasn't alone. No more barns, she whispered. No more barns, he agreed. Dawn broke gray and bitter cold, the storm's aftermath leaving a world glazed in ice. Jake was already up, checking the damage and setting David to help with temporary repairs. Martha watched from the kitchen window as the two worked side by side, the boy eager to make amends for his spying. Riders coming, Thomas called from his lookout post by the front window. Lot of them. Martha's blood chilled. Through the frost-covered glass, she could see them, 6 men on horseback, picking their way carefully down the ice-slicked trail. Hiram Thorne rode in front, his black coat stark against the white landscape. Beside him rode a heavy-set man in judge's robes, incongruous on horseback. Emma, go to the bedroom, Martha ordered. Thomas, you too. I'm staying, Thomas said, jaw set mulishly. Thomas, let the boy stay, Jake said from the doorway. David pale-faced behind him. He's old enough to see this through. Jake checked his gun, then Martha's rifle above the mantel. David, you willing to tell the truth about what Thorne asked you to do? The boy swallowed hard but nodded. Yes, sir. My PA would tan my hide if he knew I'd been party to threatening a woman and her children. The riders entered the yard, fanning out in a half-circle that blocked any escape route. Hiram dismounted with theatrical flair, helping the judge down with exaggerated courtesy. Morning, Martha, Hiram called out. Beautiful day for justice, don't you think? Jake stepped onto the porch, hand resting casual on his gun. State your business, Thorne. My business is with my sister-in-law, but since you've involved yourself, Hiram produced a sheaf of papers with a flourish. Judge Brewster was kind enough to review my claim. $3,000, plus interest, plus expenses for tracking down a debtor who fled. Comes to near $4,000 now. That's more than this ranch is worth, Jake said flatly. Oh, I'm not interested in your ranch, McCready. Just what's mine by rights. His eyes fixed on the window where Thomas stood. The boy's old enough to work. Good factories in Chicago always need strong young hands. And the girl, well, she'll earn her keep one way or another. Martha felt Jake tense beside her, but his voice remained steady. Let's see these papers. Judge Brewster, sweating despite the cold, handed over the documents. His hands shook slightly, and Martha noticed he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Jake read through them slowly, then passed them to Martha. The forgery was well done, she had to admit. The amounts, the dates, even a fair approximation of Samuel's signature, but she knew her husband's hand. And this wasn't it. Interesting, Jake said. Judge, You verified this debt personally. That is... Brewster cleared his throat. Mr. Thorne presented compelling evidence. What evidence? Did you see the original loan documents? Speak to witnesses? Now see here. Thorne interrupted. Judge Brewster's authority extends to Garrett County. Jake finished. This is Lincoln County. Different jurisdiction. He smiled coldly. But I'm sure Judge Brewster knows that. Don't you, Judge? The man's face had gone gray. There might be some question of... Papa? Everyone turned. Emma stood in the doorway, ignoring Martha's earlier order, her small face fierce with determination. In her hands, she clutched something Martha recognized with a shock, Samuel's journal. Papa wrote everything down, Emma said, marching past the stunned adults to hand the journal to Jake. Everything. Even when Uncle Hiram visited. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. She'd thought the journal lost in their flight from Kansas, but Emma, pack rat Emma, who saved every treasure, had kept it safe. Jake flipped through the pages, his expression growing grimmer. Interesting reading. Listen to this. Judge. March 15th. Hiram came again about money. Told him I'd pay the $150 I owe when the mine pays out. He said it wasn't about money anymore. Said he had plans for Martha and the children if anything happened to me. By God, I should have shot him then. Hiram's face had gone purple. That's a forgery. Is it? Jake continued reading. April 2nd. Hiram's getting bolder. Saw him watching Emma at church. Martha doesn't know. Can't tell her. She's worried enough. If something happens to me, she needs to take the children and run. Far as she can get. The other riders were shifting uneasily now, exchanging glances. These were hired guns, not monsters. The mention of a man watching a little girl at church sat poorly even with them. There's more, Jake said. April 20th. Think I've been poisoned. Doc says it's stomach trouble, but I know better. Hiram brought whiskey last week. Insisted we drink. Been sick ever since. Made my will today. Left everything to Martha clear and free. Hiram doesn't know about the will. God protect my family. Lies, Hiram snarled. But the damage was done. Even Judge Brewster was edging away from him. Samuel died April 25th, Martha said quietly. 5 days after he wrote that. You can't prove anything, Hiram said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Maybe not in court. Jake agreed. But we're not in court. We're standing in my yard, where you're threatening a woman and 2 children based on forged documents and the word of a judge who's clearly been bought. He looked at the hired guns. You boys sure you want to be part of this? Threatening children, working for a man who might have murdered his own brother? One of the riders, an older man with graying whiskers, spoke up. Nobody said nothing about children or murder. Thorne, you said this was a simple debt collection. It is. Don't let them... The morning sun broke through the clouds suddenly, sending shafts of light across the icy ground. And in that light, David Hendrick stepped forward. It ain't simple, he said, voice shaking but determined. Mr. Thorne paid me to spy on them. Said he just needed the woman alone so he could take the children legal-like. But I heard him talking to another man in town. Said once he had the girl, she'd earn back every penny and then some in San Francisco. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the horses seemed to hold still, breath steaming in the cold air. Martha felt Jake's hand find hers, squeezing tight. You lying little? Hiram reached for his gun, but found himself staring down the barrels of several weapons, not just Jake's, but those of his own hired men. I think we're done here, the graying rider said. Judge, I'd climb back on that horse if I were you. Town's got a real judge who might be interested in how you conduct business. Judge Brewster didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled onto his horse with undignified haste, not even waiting for help. This isn't over, Hiram said, but he was backing toward his horse now, suddenly aware of how alone he was. You can't prove any of this. I'll be back with real law. No, Martha said, stepping forward. You won't. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood straight,
No longer the frightened woman who'd run from Kansas. These months of hard work, of building a new life, of being part of something good and strong, had changed her. "I have Samuel's journal. I have witnesses to your threats. I have David's testimony about your plans." She took another step forward, and Hiram actually backed up. "But more than that, I have this." She pulled out a letter, worn from folding and refolding. Samuel's will, the real one, filed with a lawyer in Kansas City, leaving everything to me, free and clear, with a special provision that you, Hiram, were to have no claim on his family ever. She smiled coldly. "He knew what you were. He tried to protect us even in death." "You're lying. I searched everywhere. I sewed it into Emma's doll," Martha said simply. "The one thing I knew you'd never touch, a little girl's toy." Hiram's face cycled through rage, disbelief, and finally, defeat. The hired guns were already turning their horses, wanting no part of this anymore. Judge Brewster was halfway to the trail. "Get off my land," Jake said quietly. "Don't come back. Don't send anyone else. You've lost Thorne. Take what dignity you got left and get." For a moment, Hiram's hand twitched toward his gun again, but Thomas stepped forward, his father's big knife in his small hand, and something in the boy's eyes, Samuel's eyes, made Hiram think better of it. He mounted his horse stiffly, gathering the tatters of his authority. "You'll regret this," he said, but it sounded more like a child's threat than a man's promise. They watched him ride away, the hired guns keeping their distance from him now. Judge Brewster already disappeared over the ridge. Only when they were specks in the distance did Martha allow herself to sag. Jake caught her, holding her steady. "It's over," he said. "He won't be back. Men like that are cowards at heart. Once they're exposed, they slink away to find easier prey." "Mama, you were so brave." Emma threw herself at Martha's legs. "You saved us." "We all saved each other," Martha said, gathering both children close. She looked up at Jake, then at David, who stood awkwardly to the side. "All of us. I'm sorry," David said again. "I never meant—" "I know." Martha reached out to touch his shoulder. "You did the right thing when it counted. That takes real courage." The sun climbed higher, melting the ice, turning the world to sparkle and shine. The danger had passed like the storm, leaving them standing together in the clear morning light. Martha felt something ease in her chest, a knot of fear she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Breakfast?" she suggested, and normal life reasserted itself. David stayed to help finish the storm repairs, then headed home with a letter from Jake explaining his absence and offering his father work if they needed it. As Martha cooked, she kept touching Samuel's journal, his will, tangible proof that she'd been loved, that her children had been protected even from beyond the grave. And now they had Jake, steady and true, standing guard over their new life. The threat was ended. The storm had passed. For the first time in 2 years, Martha Sullivan allowed herself to believe they were truly safe. The news of Hiram Thorne's defeat spread through Willow Creek like wildfire through dry grass. Within a week, the same townspeople who'd turned Martha away were appearing at the ranch with offerings: fresh bread from the baker, preserves from the general store owner's wife, even a small rocking horse carved by the saloon keeper. Of all people. "Funny how brave folks get when the danger's past," Jake observed dryly, watching Mrs. Hutchins from the boarding house fuss over Emma. But Martha felt no bitterness. "They're trying," she said. "That counts for something." As November deepened into December, life at the ranch settled into new rhythms. The Hartley brothers stayed on as regular hands. Young David Hendricks came by twice a week to help with chores and learn ranching, and the cabin fairly burst with activity and warmth. It was a Sunday afternoon, snow falling soft and silent, when Jake found Martha in the barn tending to a sick calf. The children were in the house with the Hartley wives, who'd come visiting with their broods, filling the cabin with laughter and chaos. "Martha," Jake said, and something in his voice made her look up from the calf. He stood in the barn door, silhouetted against the snow-bright world,
turning his hat in his hands like a schoolboy. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, yes, I mean—" He took a breath, stepped closer. "I've been trying to find the right words for weeks now. Practice speeches in my head while riding fence, but they all sound wrong when I try to say them." Martha's heart began to race. She set down the medicine bottle carefully, wiped her hands on her apron. "Jake, just let me—" He stopped, started again. "When Clara died, I thought that was the end of it. Love, family, all of it buried under that pine tree. I kept the ranch going out of habit more than hope. Then you showed up with those children, desperate and proud and fierce as a mountain cat protecting her cubs." He stepped closer still, and Martha could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear and hope warring there. "I hired you for the wrong reasons," he continued. "Thought I was doing a good deed, maybe quieting Clara's ghost a little. But somewhere between that first breakfast and standing beside you against Thorn, things changed. The house came alive again." "I came alive again?" "Jake," Martha whispered, but he pressed on. "I know you've been through hell. I know trusting another man might be the last thing you want. But Martha Sullivan, I've grown to love you something fierce. You and those children both. And if you'd have me, I'd like to make this arrangement permanent, legal and proper, in front of God and everybody." He dropped to one knee right there in the barn straw, pulling out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said. "Been sitting in a drawer for 20 years, waiting. Clara wore her grandmother's ring, so this one's been waiting for, well, maybe it's been waiting for you." Martha felt tears streaming down her face. Through the barn door, she could hear the children shrieking with laughter in the house. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in fresh white. And here was this good man, offering her not just safety, but love, not just shelter, but home. "Yes," she said, not trusting herself with more words. "Yes, Jake McCready, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and kissed her, gentle and sure. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "Should we tell the children?" Martha asked. Jake grinned, looking younger than she'd ever seen him. "Something tells me they already know. Thomas cornered me last week. Wanted to know my intentions. That boy's got more of his father's protective streak than I realized." They walked back to the house hand in hand, snow catching in their hair and eyelashes. Sure enough, when they entered, the room fell suspiciously quiet. Emma bounced on her toes, barely containing herself, while Thomas tried to look stern and knowing. "Well, Mrs., Hartley demanded, "don't keep us in suspense. Jake McCready." Jake cleared his throat. "Mrs., Sullivan has agreed to make an honest man of me." The room erupted. Emma flew at them, wrapping her arms around both their legs. Thomas pumped Jake's hand solemnly, then hugged his mother tight. The neighbor women descended with congratulations and immediately began planning a Christmas wedding. "Mrs., Hutchins declared, apparently forgetting she'd once slammed her door in Martha's face. "Oh, it'll be perfect." The wedding took place on December 23rd in the little church where Reverend Thornby had once turned Martha away. He performed the ceremony with considerably more grace than he'd shown that October day, perhaps mindful of Jake's steady gaze and the packed church full of people who'd learned to respect the new family. Martha wore a dress of soft blue wool that the women had sewn together, each contributing cloth or lace or buttons. Emma served as flower girl, scattering dried wildflowers saved from autumn, while Thomas stood as Jake's best man, shoulders square with pride. When Reverend Thornby pronounced them man and wife, the whole church erupted in cheers. Even crusty old Sheriff Watson was seen wiping his eyes, though he'd deny it later. The reception filled the ranch house to bursting. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in the valley. The Hartley brothers played fiddle and guitar, and dancing spilled out onto the porch despite the cold. David Hendricks, now a regular fixture at the ranch,
swung Emma around until she shrieked with joy. As evening fell and the party wound down, Jake and Martha found themselves on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. Thomas and Emma were helping with cleanup, having been promised hot cocoa for their efforts. "No regrets?" Jake asked, pulling Martha close. She leaned into his warmth, feeling the solid presence of him, the safety and love he offered so freely. "None? You?" "Only that it took me so long to see what was right in front of me." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Though I think Clara would approve. She always said I was too stubborn for my own good." "Samuel would approve too," Martha said softly. "He wanted us safe and happy. Thanks to you, we are." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the clear winter sky. Through the windows, lamplight spilled warm and golden, and the sounds of their family, filled the air. Later, after the guests had gone and the children were tucked in bed, Martha stood in the kitchen she'd made her own. Jake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd offered them shelter and stayed to offer them love. "I'm thinking about that first night, how I said I'd sleep in the barn." Jake's eyes softened. "And I said you'd sleep on me." "Did you know then?" she asked. "Did you know we'd end up here?" "No," he admitted. "But maybe some part of me hoped. Maybe Clara and Samuel had a talk up there in heaven, decided we needed each other." Martha laughed, the sound bright in the quiet kitchen. "Matchmaking from beyond." "I wouldn't put it past either of them." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the world in fresh promise. The wind that had once howled threat now whispered peace. And in the lamplit warmth of the kitchen, Martha Sullivan McCready leaned against her husband's chest and whispered back, "Now I believe we truly have a home." Thomas appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mama? Pa?" The title came natural now, Jake having earned it through love rather than blood. "Emma had a bad dream." "We're coming," Martha said, taking Jake's hand. Together they climbed the stairs to comfort their daughter, their footsteps in harmony, their shadows merged into one on the wall. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and the house that had once stood lonely against the mountain now glowed with the warmth of family, complete and whole at last. Through all the seasons that followed, springs of calving and planting, summers of plenty, autumns of harvest, winters by the fire, that warmth never faded. The ranch prospered, the family grew, and love took root as deep and strong as the pines on the mountainside. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children played in the yard and Jake worked nearby, Martha would pause in her tasks and remember a desperate woman with 2 frightened children, turned away by a world grown cold, a lonely man who'd forgotten how to hope, a chance meeting in a dusty street, an offer of shelter that became an offer of love. "I'll sleep in the barn," she'd said. "You'll sleep on me." Love had answered, and so she had, safe and warm and home at last, in the arms of a cowboy who'd pulled her close and never let go. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Jake and Martha's journey. Your stories and comments mean the world to us.